Yesterday was what I am calling the official start to the 2024 presidential campaign. It started with a Republican primary debate on Fox News. There were 8 candidates there. One candidate that qualified for the debate chose not to be there, instead being interviewed by Tucker Carlson. That candidate was Donald Trump. He was not on the stage. Many questions going into this debate, including, will Trump's absence help or hurt him? Will someone perform so well that it will change the dynamics of the entire primary? Will anyone fail? What are we to expect? Okay. Rather than starting with clips today, which I will play for you, this was a 2-hour debate. There's really no way to play all of the clips that tell you what took place. Instead, I'm going to give you my overall sense of this debate. Who did best? Who did worst? Who went directly at Trump versus who did not. And my sense of the debate overall was, if the debate had been 1 hour long instead of 2, Vivek Ramaswamy would have been the clear winner. He came out hot, shot out of a cannon, strength and energy, getting the crowd involved, showing that he is the dynamic next generation candidate. Even though, as most of my audience now knows, his views are absolutely bonkers on so many issues, but it doesn't matter because debates are not actually about ideas. They're about presentation, they're about tone, they're about imagery, and they are about being articulate and interesting. However, in the second hour, it didn't go so well for Vivek. And Nikki Haley made him look very silly on foreign policy. Probably Vivek's weakest area. Nikki Haley actually having a pretty solid debate at the end of the day. There were 3 candidates that were essentially non-factors. Doug Burgum, Asa Hutchinson, and Tim Scott, essentially non-factors. They didn't get to speak much when they did. It was sort of like when they spoke, the audience clearly took a break from paying attention. Chris Christie had some good moments, but underperforming what I expected. I think Chris Christie did not get the questions he hoped to get. One was about aliens, quite literally. And at other moments, I think the questions did not really set up Chris Christie to do well. He seemed a little bit confused at different moments, so I expected Chris Christie to do really well. He did fine, but not as well as I would have guessed. Ron DeSantis was a truly pathetic bobblehead, not only bobbling while answering questions, but sometimes while the questions were being asked, he would just bobble and do his thing, which is like a judgmental bobblehead. Very, very strange. DeSantis did not do well. And if you ask me who overperformed, it's Mike Pence. And Mike Pence lacks charisma. There is no doubt about it. But next to DeSantis, Pence seemed charismatic. Mike Pence doesn't really have any business being president of the United States, but he has enough experience and knows how to behave on a debate stage that he did make some of the other candidates look inexperienced and out of their element. This includes Ron DeSantis, who Pence made look not so good. This includes Vivek Ramaswamy. So my sort of final takeaway is Vivek, probably the most energetic performance, but really faltering in the second half. Best overperformance would be Mike Pence. Solid performance, Nikki Haley and Chris Christie. Everybody else kind of irrelevant. Now, the question then becomes, does this debate move the needle in some way? I don't know. Did the debate between these 8 people with no Trump on the stage remind Republicans, hey, this is what the party could be like without Trump, and we like it. It was less ad hominem and it was, whatever. That's a risk for Trump from not being there. The entire party might say, it's not about loving any one of these 8 people. It's about I liked the atmosphere better without Trump. Maybe that's one takeaway. On the other hand, it's quite possible that voters saw this and said, nobody here interests me the way Trump does. Yeah, Nikki Haley schooled Vivek and Mike Pence made Ron DeSanctimonious look stupid, but I'd kind of rather Trump. Nobody really impressed me. We don't yet know, because it's an empirical question, what will be the impact on polling of this debate. By next week, we will know. We don't know today. Let's look at some of the moments here. Here is what I think was maybe Chris Christie's best moment, going after Vivek Ramaswamy, saying he sounds like Chat GPT and Chris Christie is sick of it.
Add climate change policies than they are of actual climate change.
Governor Haley, are you bought and paid for?
Is down by 98%
Hold on.
in the last century.
Listen.
I've had it. No,
hold on.
I've had enough. I've had enough already tonight of a guy who sounds like Chat GPT standing up here. And the last person in one of these debates, Brett, who stood in the middle of the stage and said, "What's a skinny guy with an odd last name doing up here?" was Barack Obama, and I'm afraid we're dealing with the same type of amateur standing on stage tonight.
Come over and give me a hug. Give me a hug just like you did to Obama.
The same type of amateur.
So listen, it is apparently true that Vivek Ramaswamy very close to plagiarized that line about being a skinny kid with a weird last name or something from Barack Obama. We'll look at that on the bonus show. But that was not a particularly great moment for Vivek Ramaswamy. Mike Pence calling him a rookie and getting jeered.
Now is not the time for on-the-job training. We don't need to bring in a rookie. We don't need to bring in people without experience. We need to bring
Now, I do want to say something. On the one hand, Vivek Ramaswamy took a lot of heat. However, there is a world, particularly among those who like Vivek, and again, they like him already, so does it move the needle? But there is a sense, you could argue, that if all of these establishment politicians are going after Vivek, they must see him as a threat. And that may actually raise his cachet and interest Republican voters in him. Mike Pence did crush Ramaswamy on the issue of Putin, but so did Nikki Haley. And arguably, Nikki Haley's best moment was during a tense exchange with Vivek Ramaswamy, where she really exposed him as totally in above his head.
They need to know the difference between right and wrong. They need to know the difference between good and evil. Right. When you look at the situation with Russia and Ukraine, here you have a pro-American country that was invaded by a thug. So when you want to talk about what has been given to Ukraine, less than 3.5% of our defense budget has been given to Ukraine. If you look at the percentages per GDP, 11 of the European countries have given more than the U.S. But what's really important is go back to when China and Russia held hands, shook hands before the Olympics, and named themselves unlimited partners. A win for Russia is a win for China. We have to know that. Ukraine is the first line of defense for us. And the problem that Vivek doesn't understand is he wants to hand Ukraine to Russia. He wants to let China eat Taiwan. He wants to go and stop funding Israel. You don't do that to friends. What you do instead is you have the backs of your friends. Ukraine is the front line of defense. Putin has said, once Russia takes Ukraine, Poland and the Baltics are next. That's a world war. We're trying to prevent war. Look at what Putin did today. He killed Prigozhin. When I was at the UN, the Russian ambassador suddenly died. This guy is a murderer, and you are choosing a murderer over a pro-American country.
This is super strong by Nikki Haley, and Vivek doesn't help himself with his response.
First of all, Mr. Ramaswamy, you have 30 seconds. Mr. DeSantis,
Nikki, I wish you well in your future career on the boards of Lockheed and Raytheon.
I'm not on the boards of Lockheed and Raytheon. And
Boeing came off of it, but you've been pushing this lie. You've been pushing this lie all week, Nikki.
You want to go and defund Israel? You want to
okay, let me address that. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to address each of those right now. This is the false lies of a professional politician. There you have it. So the reality
make America less safe. You have no foreign policy experience, and it shows.
And you know what? The foreign policy experience that you all have.
So listen, I know that there is a world in which you can just say, this is kind of a wash. They were yelling over each other. But Vivek really did not have any substantive response to Nikki Haley's criticisms, to the extent that this is the bar that's been set for these debates, which, believe me, is quite low. And that was arguably Nikki Haley's best moment and one of Vivek Ramaswamy's worst. As far as Ron DeSantis goes, DeSantis, even stealing Trump's catchphrases.
Somebody like Fauci and coddle him. You bring Fauci in, you sit him down, and you say, Anthony, you are fired.
Yeah, I mean, again, the Trump lines to try to get yourself to defeat Trump is all very, very weird. Here's Vivek Ramaswamy getting a big applause line, going after the others for being sort of enamored with Zelensky.
I would have support in China to be able to take China and do what we need to do with China.
Mr. Ramaswamy, you would not support an increase of funding to Ukraine.
I would not. And I think that this is disastrous, that we are protecting against an invasion across somebody else's border when we should use those same military resources to prevent across the invasion of our own southern border here in the United States of America. We are driving Russia further into China's hands. The Russia-China alliance is the single greatest threat we face. And I find it offensive that we have professional politicians on the stage that will make a pilgrimage to Kyiv, to their Pope, Zelensky, without doing the same thing for people in Maui or the south side of Chicago or Kensington. I think that we have to put the interests of Americans first, secure our own border instead of somebody else's. And the reality is, this is also how we project strength by making America strong at home.
Thank you. We're going to go.
All right. So, Vivek, I believe, is completely wrong on his foreign policy views, but he was at least forthright and strong as far as that's concerned. Ron DeSantis continuing to struggle, total word salad about China that just everybody in the room seemed perplexed by.
The U.S. has committed nearly $77 billion in aid to the Ukraine war. The administration is now asking Congress for $24 billion more. Regardless of that, the specifics of that plan, is there anyone on stage who would not support the increase of more funding to Ukraine?
We would
not support it.
Europe needs to step up. I mean, I would have Europe step up and do their job.
Mr. Ramaswamy, but you're saying you would not too, Governor DeSantis?
I will have Europe pull their weight. Right now, they're not doing that.
Would not support
and I think we need to do, and I think our support should be contingent on them doing it. And I would have support in China to be able to take China and do what we need to do with China.
I would have support in China to be able to take and be able to do what we need to do with China. Not exactly a coherent vision. Here is Chris Christie getting booed for saying we ought to stand up to Putin. Tells you where the Republican Party is right now.
Those homes and raped the daughters and the wives who were left as widows and orphans. This is the Vladimir Putin. This is the Vladimir Putin who Donald Trump called brilliant and a genius. If we don't stand up against this type of autocratic killing in the world, we will be next.
Getting jeered for suggesting Putin may not be a great guy. Here is Mike Pence making clear, Donald Trump asked me to choose him over the Constitution, and I didn't do it.
But no one's above the law. And President Trump is entitled to the presumption of innocence that every American is entitled to. And we will make sure and extend that to him. But the American people deserve to know that the president asked me in his request that I reject or return votes unilaterally, power that no vice president in American history had ever exercised or taken. He asked me to put him over the Constitution. And I chose the Constitution, and I always will. I had no right to overturn the election, and Kamala Harris will have no right to overturn the election when we beat them in 2024.
So listen, it is a very low bar, but given that low bar, I think Pence overperformed, particularly relative to some of the other sort of clowns on the stage. Last clip here, Vivek Ramaswamy may be the strongest Trump defender on the stage, calling out those like Chris Christie who criticize Trump.
President Trump, I believe, was the best president of the 21st century. It's a fact. And Chris Christie, honest to God, your claim that Donald Trump is motivated by vengeance and grievance would be a lot more credible if your entire campaign were not based on vengeance and grievance against one man. And if people at home want to see a bunch of people blindly bashing Donald Trump without an iota of vision for this country, they could just change the channel to MSNBC right now. But I'm not running for president of MSNBC. I am running for president of the United States.
Okay. So strong moment. That was in the first half for Vivek, and then it went downhill. Bottom line, as I said at the top of the segment, it's unclear this changes anything. but some interesting performances, some non-performances. And the way I would sum this up is mostly a contest to see who is the craziest candidate. That was the real competition. Here is an excellent book that I have been reading by Richard Vague. It's called The Paradox of Debt, A New Path to Prosperity Without Crisis. It's one of our sponsors today. You know, contrary to what many people think, the $6 trillion in government deficit spending in the US in the 3 years of the pandemic actually raised household wealth by $31 trillion. And that's what the book means by the paradox of debt, because at the same time, most of that benefit has gone to the top 10%. The wealth of the top 10% doubled in relation to national income over the last 40 years, while remaining completely flat for the other 90%, which drives income inequality. So we celebrate the creation of wealth, but at the same time, we need policies to address the inequality, whether it's tax incentives or job training, equitable debt amnesty. And that's really what Richard Vague is recommending and exploring in this really, really good book. Vague is a renowned expert on macroeconomics and debt, and his background includes serving as Secretary of Banking and Securities for the state of Pennsylvania. I think my audience will love this book, and you can pick up a copy at davidpakman.com/debt. The link is down below.